So, what do you remember, if anything, about your grandparents or your great grandparents?
My mother's mother was full-blooded French. Never learned to speak English. Am I talking too loud?
No.
She never learned to speak English. She could say a couple of words in English, nasty words, and uh, and my grandfather was her husband was French also.
Did they move to America?
Did they what?
Did they live in America ever?
Oh yeah, they lived in Brainerd, my town. They went to Canada and then they from France and then they came to the United States from Canada, just like the Mexicans do. They crossed the border, came over here, and
Do you remember what year they came, or around what year?
no, I haven't any idea.
But this is your great grandparents.
My real grandma, my mother's mother, and her father, and my dad's parents. They came from Ireland or England or someplace. So they were a mixed. They were a mixed breed. They don't like to call it that, but that's what it amounted to.
Do you know what they did for a living, or
Yeah, my dad and my grandfather, they were painters and paper hangers. And my grandfather, on my dad's side, he was worked in a graveyard carving tombstone. That's before they had machinery to carve it. He carved tombstones and put names on and everything. He was super strong, real powerful man.
with a hammer and chisel and stuff?
Yeah, yeah. Now they have machines to do that, of course, but
Hmm.
in those days.
So your grandparents on your mother's side were all French, and on your father's side they were English and
They were
Irish.
mixture, yeah,
So you're half English, Irish,
Yeah.
and half French.
yeah. I don't talk about being French anymore because the French are on our list. I almost was going to say something starting with an S, but so I don't tell people I'm French. I just tell them I'm an American, a mixture.
What do you remember about your childhood before the war? Anything you remember growing up during the
Well,
Depression?
it's compared to now, it was a poor childhood because I remember going to a Christmas party when I was 12 years old, and they give a present and they give a big meal to all the kids, and I looked around and I suddenly discovered that it was all poor kids from our town, all the poor people. So I got up and left, but I told my brothers, be sure to bring me my toy and bring me some food. But that's when I discovered that I was poor, when I was about 12 years old. And I had a chip on my shoulder because of that.
Do you remember when the Depression hit? What that was like for you and your
That was
parents?
that was all the time. Depression was all the time when I was growing up.
Your whole childhood?
All the time during my childhood, yeah.
Do you remember any kind of jobs you had or friends you had?
I had a lot of jobs, but one of my main jobs after I was 17, the year before I graduated, I went to a carnival. I worked in a carnival 2 years, which was quite an experience in itself, you know.
How old were you?
Well, it made me smarter getting along with people, and it helped when I went in the military.
Remember you telling me you did card tricks to people in the carnival all the time?
Yeah,
Was
yeah. I had crooked cards, and I weighed people, and made believe that the men. I touched the men, but then the women come up and I made believe I was going to touch them to see how much they weighed. And they laughed. They paid a dime and they got give us a dime and they got a 7-cent present. So we made 3 cents every time we talked to somebody.
Do you have a lot of girlfriends when you were a young kid?
Uh,
In your teens and stuff?
Not a lot, but I had some girlfriends. Yeah.
You don't want to talk about that?
Well,
Anything
I was
you
going to say
remember?
my wife isn't here. Well, they had the Army had a survey of a couple of years ago, or about 5 years ago when I was 80. The Army had a survey and they called all the guys to see and checked them to see if they had hepatitis, a venereal disease. And they had a chart that they gave me like that, and they had on there if you had over 10 girlfriends, have you had over 10 sexual experiences with different girls? And I start laughing, and there were some guys there, some black guys too, and young guys, you know. They were real studs. And the nurse had the door open so she could hear us. And I said, "Hey, nurse, about this question here, I can't answer it. I never had 10 my whole life. Where the hell have I been?" And she said, "Fill out the report and shut up, Mr. Thomas."
What about, do you remember getting in a lot of fights when you were younger, or
Too many.
too many?
I had, when I was 15 or 16, I started boxing, and I never lost a fight in Brainerd. And so everybody knew me as the boxer. You know, I was a Golden Glove for 3 years. And I never lost a fight until I went to Minneapolis, where the real fighters were.
Mm.
And then when I joined the Army, I had 2 fights and they made me a corporal. They gave me a promotion. I was a jockstrap athlete, they call them. And I found out that I wasn't quite as good as I thought I was, fighting my brothers and kids, fighting people that didn't know how to fight. I was real good. But as soon as I started fighting with people that had fights, I wasn't too good then.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 2 brothers, 2 sisters. One brother died several years ago, but my 2 sisters, my brother is still alive. And my brother wrote me and called me to a party a couple of months ago. He was 80 years old. And I said, "I'm not going to tell anybody my baby brother is 80 years old. How the hell does that make me look? You got a younger brother that's 80. I said,
Did you get along with your brothers and sisters when you were a kid?
"Oh yeah. Well, I was the big brother."
You were the oldest?
Huh?
You were the oldest brother?
Yeah, I was the oldest brother. Can you just can you cut it off a minute so I can blow my nose? I was the only one in my family had graduated. I when I was 17, I hit a teacher that was picking on me because my uncle gypped him on a land deal. My uncle really did gyp him, I found out later. And so when he found out who I was, he started picking on me. And so one day I hit him and knocked him flat and ran. And that was the end of my high school career that year. And the next year, they had fired him for something else, so I came back and finished my high school career. Graduated 39.
None of your other siblings graduated from high school?
No.
Do you remember getting in any fights to stick up for your little brothers or sisters?
Well, I've got a story that I'm sending in to Reader Digest. I got it all ready to go to Reader Digest about my brother Richie coming home and breathing real hard and laughing. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, he said, Bob and I chased Orville Tho home." And I said, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Orville is in my class and he's a little retarded. He's a great big kid, you know." And I said, "You quit that." And he said, "Well, you don't have to." I don't have to mind you. I'll do what I want to do. And so the next week, when I was taking care of him and my sisters, he came in the door crying. And his hair was messed up and he had a bloody lip. His shirt was torn. And I said, who did that to you? Well, I was ready to go. Who did it? He said, we caught Orville Tho today. He caught the guy they were chasing. The guy beat the hell out of both of them.
Were you happy to hear that kind of?
Well, he quit picking on, especially big kids.
Do you remember when you met Mabel?
I always knew Mabel. I don't remember when I met her, but I remember helping my uncle move her and her mother out of an apartment into another apartment when I was about 14 or 15. But I always knew her because she lived down the street where I live, and I used to whistle at her and called her Blondie, and she thought I was terrible.
So she lived in Brainerd with you guys?
Oh yeah, she lived right down the street from where I lived. Yeah.
Do you remember when you started dating her?
Yeah, I remember exactly. I went to have a date with one of her friends because I had $16. Had enough money to really have an evening. And I went and knocked on the door, and the girl that I was going with came to the door and said, shh. She said that the guy was there from a military academy. And I went in and said hi to him. He was there for a couple of weeks. So the girl said, why don't you go take out Mabel Pickard? She'll go with you. And I said, she doesn't like me. I whistled at her when I had my motorcycle. And he said, she says, go try her. So I went, and Mabel was there sitting in a car with her boyfriend, and they'd had a fight. And I came and did like that. She came out of the car, and I said, I got money. I want to go dancing and go on a date. And she says, well, okay, I'm mad at Fricklin. That was her boyfriend. So her boyfriend got out of the car, and he said, you're going to beat me up. And so she said, that's Bud Thomas, a boxer. And he says, oh, well, I'll get even with you. And he got back in his car and drove off. So we started going together right then.
And you guys hit it off right away?
Oh, yeah. There wasn't anybody else. She was the only one that was, that I come close to marrying. But I wasn't what you would call a real choice either. Short, poor, not educated, no future,
What about Mabel? What do you know about her childhood?
She worked. She was real smart in school. She was an A student. And I think that's where Michael is all right, but where Monica and some of them got their smarts. I'm sure that's what it is. They didn't get them from me.
So was she poor as a child too, or did she come from a?
She was.
Was she poor as a?
Yeah. She was poor, and her mother and father were divorced, and she was poor, real poor.
Did she graduated high school?
Oh yeah, she graduated from high school a year after I did.
Wait, hold on. There's a problem. What's going on?
I think it's just the headphones.
Think the microphone's acting up, or the headphones?
What's a light?
No, the
It's all
microphone.
good. It's the headphones.
Okay, everything's okay again. So, what were you saying about Mabel?
She graduated a year after I graduated. And then when she came out to Fort Lewis when I was in the Army, we got married.
While you were in the Army?
Yeah, which was a poopy thing to do. If you ever get in the Army, don't marry somebody and then go overseas. Don't do that. It's not fair to them.
Yeah. Give them a chance. Do you remember what kind of things you were doing, jobs you had, or hobbies just before the war started?
Yeah, I was working for the telephone company, working out phone bills for my family and my uncles. You know, they let us, poor people, let you work out your phone bills. I think I was getting, I can't remember exactly, but I was getting almost $2 a day if it worked a real full day.
Do you remember when the war started? What your reaction to it was? Did you know you were going to join the army, or not?
I was already in the Army.
So you joined.
I
the army
was
before
in
the
the
war
Army
started?
in the Philippines when the war started. But I was like most guys, I was dumb as hell. I thought, well, it'll take us a couple months to beat them.
So okay, so then let's back up. Why did you join the army in the first place? Do you remember what went into that decision?
Well, one of the reasons was they had such a nice uniform, and they had beautiful boots, like I think I told you before, and they had a big party coming at the armory, a dress-up party, a big dance, and only the kind of the rich people in town went to that, and I got to go because I was in that outfit.
So it was mainly to.
I still get mail from the outfit. Some of the people are in Afghanistan and Iraq right now. Some of my that same company that I belonged to, the 194th. Well, my uniforms. No, that's all right. That's okay.
You get mail from the younger guys who are there right now.
Yeah, well, no, I get. I don't pay dues or anything. I'm an honorary member of the 194th.
So mainly you joined the army to kind of get a taste of high class society, or.
Yes, yeah. I can't say why I joined. I think I joined because I was dumb, but I didn't know I was dumb at the time. And anyhow, after I got to be a private first class, I got $60 a month.
Is that more than you were ever making with any other
Oh
job?
yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your boot camp and your initial military training, what that was like?
Well, I lucked out because as soon as I went to boot camp, they were looking for fighters. So I said I would fight for them, and I got promoted to corporal. Right away, I got promoted to 2 stripes, ahead of all my friends. And they call it a jockstrap promotion. And after 2 fights, one with a black guy who really beat me, but they gave me the fight, and another one, and we all lied about how many fights we had. I had 60 or 70 fights, and I told him I had 6. And he said he had 10, and Christ, he fought like he must have had 100 fights.
You lied because you had lost some and you didn't want them to know that? Why did you lie about how many fights you had?
You always lie about how many fights you have, so they give you somebody that's real not good fighter. You don't want to fight guys that are real good. What kind of sense would that make?
Do you remember? Did you ever have a nickname coming up in the army?
Yeah, my nickname was AB, because we had a guy named James Thomas, and we had an A, and my middle name was Benjamin. So when they were calling out roll one day early in the morning, the guy said, Thomas. And I hollered out, AB or JC? And the guy said, AB, you wise ass. And so from then on, my nickname was AB. That's the first thing the guy said the day when he called me. He says, this AB Thomas?
Do you remember any guys dropping out because it was too hard for them?
I wouldn't say it was too hard for them. I would say they were smarter than the rest of us. They dropped out, some of them, and went to like radio school, or a cook and baker school, or a language school. One guy went to language school and went to Monterey and learned, but never got captured. He was in a different outfit.
When you
And
joined,
the big guy in that picture there, Shorty Roth, in that picture, the big 7-foot guy, he cried when they kicked him out and put him in another outfit. He went to Alaska. He couldn't fit in a tank. He was too big for a tank, and he cried. You know, it was the best thing that ever happened to him, of course.
what was I gonna say? Do you remember ever feeling like you wanted to drop out before you kept going, or were you always?
No, I was a dummy gung ho guy. No, I had good luck in the military, good luck for promotions, and I know it had something to do with being in a carnival and learning how to interact with people, and I wasn't afraid to speak up. That's how I got some teeth knocked out, because the guy said, "Shut up," and I thought he said, "Get up." And I got up and he broke off my 2 teeth. But they're pretty nice.
So when you joined the Army, did you get moved around a lot, or were you in Brainerd the whole time?
No, I was in Brainerd until February. 8 months before the war started, they sent us for training at Fort Lewis. And I had all my training at Fort Lewis, Washington.
But you didn't end up moving to California until...
No, that was after. That was after I come home. And I never even was assigned to a unit. I was in the hospitals. I set a record at Van Nuys Hospital. I rented a motel room across the way, and I only spent one night. I was 6 months in the hospital. I only spent one night there. I lived in that motel. And one night I was sleeping, and the family went to the motel and left me sleep there. And I was madder than hell.
So I remember hearing that you were also in the Air Force. Is that true? Were you in the Army and the Air Force?
My God, my uniform. I spent 15 years in the Air Force. I got out of the Army, and
This before or after you came home?
after I came home, I got out of the Army, and my pension was $400, and that was pretty good, but that's not a lot of money. And so I went back in the Air Force because they give me more stripes. That's how I got all those stripes. They don't mean anything to you, but in the service, when you go someplace, the guys know what the stripes are. They know you were somebody. The Air Force uniform. And I'll admit, I was proud. I was vain, because the guys would say, "What the heck is that stripe there?" That's a senior master sergeant. Some guys had never even heard of it. They didn't even know what it was. But when I first discovered I was old, I was at Oxnard I was 36 years old, and I could hear, and I'd just been there a week, and I could hear the young guys talking, and they were talking about what kind of a base it was. And they said this is a good base, Oxnard Air Force Base by LA. They said, but the officers are real good, the sergeants are pretty good, but there's one guy there, you got to watch him. The guy said, "Which one is that?" An old sergeant. I could hear him talking, and I thought, there's no old sergeants here. And so the guy said, "It's that little guy that thinks he's Napoleon. He's got a Napoleonic complex." And he said his sleeve, he's got that sleeve all full of that There, I almost said the word again. Shit. He had, and I had all this stuff. It was authorized, all this stuff, not this, but in 4 patches here, and this, oh, there they are, 2 patches. I had 4 patches by that time because I'd been in the service another 2 years. And my sleeve was completely filled up. And it's that little guy with all that stuff on his shoulder. So I immediately went to the tailor and said, take off. It was a different uniform. I said, take off all that stuff. Just leave this on there. And I said, take off the medals. And I left, I give it away. I have a combat infantry medal from when I was in the rifle. If sometimes if kids like the medals, I give them to them. I give one of her nephews that. But that doesn't mean anything to civilians, but that means something to military people. And when I was at Oxnard, there was a lot of Navy men there. And so we had a meeting, and they said, what do you do when the Navy men, they don't know what to do, they salute you. They think you're an officer or something with all that junk on there. So we decided, we said, salute them. Don't ignore them. When they salute you, give them a salute. Say, have a nice day, sailor. You know.
When you want to describe what happened when you first got deployed out to go to war? What was that like?
When I first got.
When you knew you were first going to go actually out overseas and go to war.
I didn't know I was going to go to war because the war didn't start for 9 months later, and they told us. When I enlisted and all the talk, they told us we were going to go to Alaska. And when we got on the ship, we didn't know I was going to go to the Philippines till I was on the ship. And then they told us, and then it came out in our Brainerd paper that we were being deployed to the Philippines, which was a bad move.
So what was that like when you did find out that you were going to the Philippines?
Well, it wasn't bad. The war wasn't on. Haircuts were 15 cents. And all the booze was real cheap. And for the guys that liked women, they had all these beautiful mandalagas, they call them, beautiful Filipino ladies. And the Filipino people were always good to me. They were always nice. But that was 9 months before the war started. We didn't know anything. We had no way of looking. I'd have jumped overboard if I'd have known that. You know, and so would everybody else.
So where were you when you did know you were going to go into combat?
I was in Philippines, right in Manila. They bombed us, right? The same day that the war started. They bombed us a couple hours later. And I thought there was, in my mind, you know, I thought, and so did some of the other guys, I thought there were thousands of planes. The sky was black with planes. There were 57. That's how many planes and fighter planes bombed us, you know. In my mind, it was thousands, and there was, after the history and everything, there was 57. But when they're dropping bombs on you, it seems like a lot of them, you know.
So you want to talk a little bit about what happened, all your experience in the war before you got captured? How long were you actually fighting before you got captured?
4 months. 4 months. I don't even know if the Army likes us to talk about it, but I only had 6 days in my tank, and we lost our tank. We'd come to a bridge, and the Japanese were coming behind us with big guns, big mortars, shell that would shoot up a tank with no sweat. And they got excited, and they blew the bridge before some of us got across. So my tank I just got out of the tank and got into a truck, a supply truck. But my tank took a wrong turn, and it was four different guys. You know, I wasn't in it, of course. I had four guys, and they all got killed. What they did when after the war, they found my tank, and then the Japanese had drilled a hole in it and filled it up with sand, and suffocated the guys, so that they had a good tank. You know, but they don't put that. They don't put that in the history books. They don't talk about the dumb mistakes that we made.
Do you so you were ordered to surrender, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. We were ordered to leave our weapons and leave our trucks, and I had a truck full of supplies, and I burn it. But we were not supposed to do that, and we walked about 3 miles away. So because the Japanese wanted that equipment, you know, and we walked out the road, and that's where my friend, the Japanese, took all the watches, anything you had on you. People didn't wear earrings or anything, but they had stuff, necklaces, you know, a cross or something. They took everything, and my wedding ring slipped right off. But my friend, he said he couldn't get his off, and the Japanese guard took out his bayonet, and my friend's ring slipped right off. Hadn't had it off for years. But he said, when that guy pulled out his bayonet, he said, suddenly my fingers shrunk up.
So what was it like as you were being captured? What was the order of the way things happened? You were ordered to surrender, and then did you go voluntarily to the Japanese?
Oh yeah, I went out in the road. We come out of the jungle and went out on the main road, the one that we marked at I was at the 65-mile mark, or some of them went 70 miles from Craigador, but I was at 65 miles, and we walked to almost the prison camp. And that's when, after 7 or 8 days walking on the death march, about the third day I hid under a house, and the Filipinos gave me a lot of food, a lot of water and everything. And then 2 days later, when another group of Americans come by, I and my friend slipped away and joined the group. Now some people will say, why don't you run off in the jungle? And it sounds good, but if you went anywhere near where there was Filipinos, the Japanese would kill. Besides killing the Americans, they'd kill all the Filipinos. They were merciless. And so you wouldn't want to go into a little village and hide out and then have somebody find out there was an American there, and the Japanese come in there, kill everybody.
Why did you hide under the
Because my friend had his knee went bad. He couldn't walk any further, so they'd just bayonet you. You know, they'd kill you right there. And after seeing guys bayoneted and trying to get water, they stick a bayonet in your loins, you know, and cut somebody's head off and walk around with the guy's head on a stick. That kind of made you do what they said to do.
You stayed under this Filipino family's house for 2 days?
I did what? Yeah.
You stayed under
Oh, I
house for 2
stayed
days?
right down there, and then at night they'd come and feed us and give us water and everything. I have a tendency to want to salute my own uniform. I get a pension from the Army.
Still to this day?
I get a pension from the Army. I get what they call a post-traumatic stress syndrome. You read about it in the paper. People have an anxiety reaction to loud noises and certain things above and beyond what would be normal. PSTD, they call it. And I get a pension for that, and then I get a pension from the Air Force. And I get a pension from, I don't know if I should tell you all this, I get a pension from 17 years I worked civil service. So, I come away as a poor sergeant, but I get more than some officers did.
Before you went on the death march, when you surrendered, how did that work? Did you have to like go look for Japanese officers to surrender to?
No, we walked out of the jungle about 6 or 7 miles. I can't remember. Everybody could walk that could walk. We walked out of the jungle to a main road, to the main road where the death march took place.
So
And
you just
they,
walked immediately from the jungle into the Bataan Death March?
we walked out to the road, and from that road we walked to Camp O'Donnell, a prison camp. It was a terrible prison camp. It was so bad. It was such a bad prison camp and so smelly. So many people died that they abandoned it in 2 months. The Japanese, a few of them come in there with masks on and sprayed themselves. They wouldn't touch anything because they're super clean people.
How far did they make you guys march on the death march?
Well, it depends on where you come out of the jungle. I marched 65 miles. That's why, and they didn't give us a lot of drinking water and hardly any food. And so guys would faint, and when they fainted, they'd stab them with a bayonet.
How much water and food did they give you?
But we drank out of polluted streams where there were bodies in there and everything, where nobody would drink that water except somebody that was dying of thirst. But they didn't have to do that. That's the point. There was a lot of water. It was just, I don't know. And the United States didn't tell anybody about the death march until 8 months later, when they had a big bond drive, and they had a bond drive and collected millions and millions of dollars. Had a few more guys go in the service, They're having trouble right now. They must be breathing on your ass to go in the service.
How many days did you march?
I was on the march about 8 days. I marched 6 days. 2 days I was under the house. Then they brought us to a place where there was a shipyard, and they stuffed us in a boxcar. And I thought I was in the boxcar for 2 or 3 days, and then afterwards I found out I was in there 6 hours. And some of the guys, there were so many guys died, and they couldn't fall over. And I had to go to the guys would poop in their pants and pee in their pants and everything, because there was no facility, they were just stuffed like cattle. And when we got out of the boxcar, there was a lot of Filipinos standing around, kids and women, and not too many men, but standing around when we got out of the boxcar. And I just pulled my pants down and did a big job right there in front of everybody. And a beautiful lady, come up and unzipped her bag and gave me some toilet paper. I hadn't seen any toilet paper for a long time, And when we were in prison camp a couple of years later, the Red Cross came in one camp and gave the guy some toilet paper, and the Red Cross took a picture of it. And then the minute the Red Cross left, the guy come and wanted his toilet paper back. Got all this, so, But that was, you got a thing in there, embarrassing moments. That was my most embarrassing moment. And I had,
boxcar?
huh?
When you came out of the boxcar?
Yeah, when I did my job, right? You got to think about it. There's kids and little girls, and this Filipino lady, I already liked him anyhow, so she came up and opened. Would have made a hell of a movie.
It's making a hell of an interview. So it went from you were on the march, and then you get into this boxcar, and then from there they take you
To Camp O'Donnell, which all the books that they have, that the writings, they rate that as one of the worst camps. It was a bad camp. People were dying every day. They were laying there dead, and they were I went on 2 burial details where put them in a blanket, and sometimes when you go to bury them, the animals had dug up the guys, so we had to dig it deeper so the animals wouldn't, and put their dog tag in their mouth, so that when after the war, when they came, they could tell who was who.
So the Japanese abandoned that camp after 2 months?
Yeah, after 2 months, they sent us to Cabana One, another camp where we were there for 2 years, which was a little better organized.
Were you in Camp O'Donnell the whole 2 months it was
Yeah,
open?
I was there the whole 2 months. In fact, I was on the burial details twice, and it's a good thing that I was strong and healthy because about 4 of our guys died right there. And they were so weak from the death march.
So how was the camp run and organized? Were there just a few guards around?
Wasn't organized. But they didn't give us anything. Didn't give us any food, or very little water. The food was dirty, and it was indescribable. I have a couple of books here. I don't read them, but I gave one book to Bruce, and he read it, and then he told me, he says, don't read it. He says, don't read the book. Because for a couple of years, I had terrible nightmares. I don't have them anymore. I walk every day. I actually walk a mile or a mile and a half every day. And I'm stiff and everything, but I sleep good at night. And usually I drink a glass of wine after I walk, build myself up, tear myself down.
Were you able to sleep at all during that camp, really, or did you just stay up most nights?
Yeah, we slept when we could, but it's hell when you're sleeping and there's a pile of shit right next to you. Oh, I meant human feces of the species, I think the Army calls it.
So the sleeping situation was it just, what did the camp look like? Was it very big?
It was terrible. It was terrible. It wasn't organized at all. They were all Filipino Army barracks that were never finished for Army guys from the Philippines, and they were a rugged bunch of prisoners. They didn't care how they treated their prisoners. You're sleeping on a board, and when you have straw, when you got yourself some grass or straw, it was infected with ticks and lice and fleas and everything. Just you'd shave your hair off and shave your whiskers off. The lice it's an animal-like existence.
What was how did they get you from one camp to the next camp? Did you have to march?
Oh, they lined us up one time. They came and they put us and picked out strong guys, and I was strong. And they picked me out, and we worked on a bridge for 2 weeks. Then for some reason, they decided that they didn't want to build that bridge. It was too hard to build. So they brought us back to camp. So a year or so later, they lined up guys to go to Japan. They sent everybody to Japan. And when they lined me up, I stood there like, in the line, and I go, and they come up and they felt of me. And the guy kicked my ass and said, get over there where the workers were. But I tried to, because I didn't want to leave. But that's when they sent me to Minomachi, to a Mitsubishi mining camp in Japan.
So you went to Japan? I didn't know.
I went to Japan for 1 year, which was better in a way after we got there, because we had a place to sleep, a room for 4 guys, and 2 guys worked, and then 2 guys slept, and and the Japanese guards weren't as bad there. They weren't sweethearts. You wouldn't want to take any of them home to meet your mother or anything, but they weren't quite as bad as they were in the Philippines. Actually, what it amounted to, the younger the guards were, the poopier they were, the quicker they were to hit you and kick you and beat you up. The younger ones. The older ones that had experience, they weren't as cruel. That was my observation, and some of the other guys too.
So the prison in Japan was the second one you went to?
It was the third one I went to. I went to Camp O'Donnell, another little camp, for a month, but that was just while I was waiting to go to the Philippines. But I mean to Japan.
Do you remember any prisoners trying to escape or actually escaping?
They said they tried to escape, but there was no place. They shot 10 prisoners in Cabanatuan, the first prison camp I was in, because they said a prisoner escaped. Well, what he did, he was delirious with malaria, and he just went through the gate, and he went out in the haystack and laid down. And a couple days later, after they shot the 10 guys, they found him. But they'd already killed 10 guys. So that's my number. My number was Nihaku Gojiyang, 254. And if somebody escaped, they'd shoot 5 guys on each side of your number. That was the theory. So you didn't want anybody trying to escape. Of course, when we got to Japan, escape was impossible. Where would you go? Even if you could speak Japanese, you stood out. You stood out.
Did you go back to the Philippines after you went to Japan? You were in
Yeah. They brought us back to a hospital. A month and a half later, they had kept us in Japan for a month and a half, and dropped a lot of food and came in with food to fatten us up, because the prisoners looked so bad, and they didn't want the American public to see what kind of shape. I've got some pictures of the prisoners, all starving to death. They didn't want the public to see that. I found all this out later because they were kissing the Japanese ass so that we could be friendly again, and for business purposes,
How long were you when they brought you back from Japan back to the Philippines? What were those? How many camps were you in after that?
I was in a couple of hospitals, but it was a different thing because we wore a big band that said we were repatriated. It had a big band that said, so everybody was nice to us. Everybody was super nice, and you couldn't do any wrong, And a guy that I was with, he died a couple of years ago from Salinas. We were walking along the beach, and there was a tent there, and it was Red Cross. Had a donut machine there. The place was about as big as this room, a tent, and they had a donut machine in there. So we went up there. I finally got a donut. It made me sicker than heck. But so he asked for a donut. I said, give us one. He says, well, you can't have any donuts because this is the officer's day for donuts, and you're enlisted men. He says, and I said, what the hell? And my friend said, what are you talking about? We just got out of prison camp. We can have anything we want. And he says, no donuts. He was a great big fat guy, and he had a telephone, that you ring up. And so my friend, we all had knives by then. I had my knife. Pull out my knife. My friend, he cuts a door right in the tent. And the guy, The guy goes over, he rings the phone, and 2 lieutenants come, 2 young lieutenants. And they said, "What's going on here?" The guy said, "He cut our tent. He had a knife. He threatened me," which we didn't threaten, a fat bastard. So he gave us a stick. The guard said, "Well, here, take." We had a big stick, and we just had 3 dozen donuts on a stick. So the guards start laughing, just like you're doing now. Once they got away, they took us in a Jeep, and they took us to an airplane. And it was said Yosemite. I said, "What's a Yosemite?" Or Yosemite? That was the name of the airplane. The guy said, "You're not from California, are you?" I said, "No, I'm from Minnesota." He said, "Where the hell is that?" Anyhow, so they put us on a plane and took us to Manila to a hospital.
So you're this. Where were you at this point when you're
Okinawa.
So you're in Japan, but you're on an
Well,
American military?
they took us from Japan and put us on a hospital ship. In Japan, but when we went to Okinawa, this guy and I they'd give us $300, and we give a couple of $100 to a guy, and he rowed us to shore. We jumped ship. They come there with a speaker. "Ah, rah, rah, rah. Well, we're leaving. We're going to. You're going to get court-martialed." A whole bunch of crap. But we didn't go back, and so we got to fly to Manila.
And you never. So at that point on, you were pretty much free.
Oh yeah, we were free. Yeah.
What was it like when you're at the last prison camp you were at before you were getting freed? Like
I was in Japan in the coal mine, Mitsubishi coal mine.
And did you get to hear while you were there about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Is that why you?
Oh, the Japanese. We had a plant. You know what a plant is? Some guy that worked doing dog leg work for the Japanese, and he could understand Japanese real good. I mean, real good. He was an interpreter, but they didn't know that, so he could hear everything they said. So they were talking about 2 planes come over, and one plane dropped a bomb. The other plane didn't even drop any bomb, and it burnt the city up. And so we come to the conclusion that they must have been drinking too much vodka or something. Because how the hell could one plane? Because they had dozens of planes come over, and you could see the bombs coming down. You could see them coming down. So then that was Nagasaki or Hiroshima, whatever it was. And I found out later, after when I went to work for the government, I got access to a lot of secret papers. I learned more than I wanted to learn about the way that they run the government. And also I worked for a while for Secret Service, and they didn't want to bomb Nagasaki. There was a lot of that was a third target in case there was clouds and everything. That was because there were so many Catholics there. Can you imagine that? There was Catholic churches in Nagasaki, and so some of the guys in the government were madder than heck when they bombed an atomic bomb on a Catholic town, a town that had Catholics in it. God.
So you only heard about those bombs in the prison camp because this
Oh,
guy
hell
could
no.
understand.
No. We didn't even know. We never knew what an atomic bomb was. When they said that Roosevelt died, nobody in camp, we had 100 Americans and 400 Englishmen. Nobody knew who Truman was. Truman is our new president. Who the hell is Truman? Well, he's a guy from Missouri. Never heard of him. Nobody, not one out of all the guys in our camp, even the guys from Missouri, said, "What kind of guy? You don't even know who the president is. He's from Missouri. You don't know who he is."
Oh yeah, so you were...
He died about 3 or 4 months before the war ended. Roosevelt did, and then they told us that the new president was Truman. Turned out to be a good president, though.
So you were in prison camps with Englishmen too?
Oh, I was with 400 Englishmen, yeah. Limeys, we call them.
How did all the prisoners get along, the Americans?
We got along good. One time, a friend of mine and I broke into the kitchen and stole a bunch of bread, and we had a place to hide it in the toilet where nobody went in the toilet. There was a place to hide the bread there because you couldn't have it where you lived because they searched everything. So the Englishmen, the officers questioned everybody. So after the war, about 2 weeks after the war, after everything was settled down and the Americans dropped all the food to us and everything, the Englishman said, "Can I ask you a question, Sergeant Thomas?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And he said, "Was it you that stole the bread?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I knew it, I knew it." He said, "Well, where did you put it? Where'd you hide it?" And I said, "You know that big place in the toilets, the big square place?" I said, we wrapped it up in some kind of paper we had, icky paper. We wrapped it up in that and put it there." But he couldn't prove it at the time. But they wouldn't tell the Japanese. The Japanese would cut your hand off or something. Even if you stole something, you couldn't tell the Japanese because they were really against stealing. The Americans weren't that. By that time, after a couple of years in prison camp, you'd steal somebody's eyeballs if you had a chance, you know.
So most of the time the prisoners got along. You don't remember
Oh yeah.
getting any
Yeah.
fights with
Well,
prisoners?
if you didn't, you had to get along. If you didn't get along, they moved you. They moved one guy, one American, out of my section because if you left any food or left anything there, he'd eat it. No matter if you had a big sign on it, someone cut off your right hand and you couldn't take everything with you, but if you had some bread left over, an old piece of whale blubber or something, he'd steal anything. They had the movie the other night.
What movie?
Well, we were at a movie and they turned off the movie and cut on a loudspeaker and said, "Would the people that have their cell phones," of course they had a sign, "Don't use cell," said, "would the kids in this row stop looking at their movie?" They had a little thing and they were at a movie. We paid, they paid $9, we paid $6 or something to go to this movie, and I couldn't hear them or anything, but they were watching a movie because they were kind of bored with the other movie, so they're there. But what about the people sitting behind them? So they got a
little mini.
they got a
player.
movie inside of a movie.
Is it ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you remember any stories about policies the guards had about beating you when you ran away or stole anything or something like that? Fights with the guards that you had? Do you remember getting in any fights with the guards?
You don't get in fights with the guards. It cut your head off.
But like, what was the story you were talking about when they said shut up and you thought they said get up or something?
Oh, that was an American.
Oh.
That was an American. Then when I went in Japan, in the coal mine, our guard was an old sergeant, 35 years old, had been, and he was all scarred up. One day he showed us his scars. He was in the Chinese war, fighting Chinese people. And if we got the fighting, boy, he wouldn't stand for that. He was against, the reason was he didn't want any worker to get injured. You know, and one of my friends, I was telling Gene the other day that we in the coal mine we had big things we hooked together and shoveled the coal or the rocks down into a coal car, and then when they'd put dynamite in there, they'd tell you that dynamite, and so everybody would sit like that, you know. So my friend, he was kind of tired, and he had his hand on one of the chutes, and a big rock fell and cut his thumb off. His thumb was hanging like that, and he didn't cry or anything. So I grabbed him, you know, and we went down to up to another tunnel where the Japanese doctor was. And the Japanese doctor, he started feeling of me to see where I was hurt. I said, he was sitting there, and he took that old rag off, and and he took a pair of snippers and snipped off his thumb. And but it turned out to be a good thing because he worked in the kitchen, and he'd bring me food every night, nearly every night. Every time, you know, he'd steal something, put it in his pocket or put it in his hat. Of course, the Japanese, they'd take your hat off, look for stolen contraband, you know.
Do you remember? You told me one time that you and some other prisoner had some kind of scheme going on where you would sell things to the other prisoners.
Oh yeah, we made Nick the Greek. Well, he's gone now, but my wife, this wife here, didn't like him. My other wife didn't like him either. But anyhow, we made a little printing press, and we had baking soda and stuff, and he duplicated a pill for gonorrhea. Adabrain or something, they call it something. But we made a pill that looked just like the real thing, and we'd sell it to the guards because the Japanese would really get on their guys if they got gonorrhea. They were hell. And for an American that slipped out and working on a detail and had intercourse with a Filipino and got gonorrhea, there was no treatment for him. So for a while there, we made these pills, and we had a real good thing going, selling these pills. But one Japanese guard, Big Speedo we call him, he took it to town and had it analyzed. And the guy told him they're fake, there's nothing to them. They're baking powder and soda. So he'd come back, and he hit my friend once, and kind of broke his jaw. He didn't break it, but he hit him. He couldn't chew too good for a couple of weeks, and he told him he wanted his money. So he gave him some money. So the next day I went out there, I was scared, with a box full of money, all the money we could muster and steal from somebody else. And it was Japanese money. I have some here. I'll show you before you go. And I went out there and I bowed to him, you know, handed him the money and threw it down. And he counted out a whole bunch of it, and then he threw the rest down. Big Speedo, we call him. He just took the money that we owed him. So after the war, when my friend Nick the Greek went there, they opened a gambling place in Japan, and they hired Big Speedo, the old Jap. They hired him after the war crimes trial. He was in a war crimes trial, but they said he was fair. He never hit anybody unless they tried to cheat him or something. So Nick hired him, and after 3 years, when the Japanese, 3 years later, the Japanese asked all Americans to leave, 1951 or 52 or something like that. Big Speedo told Nick that he was rich, that he got rich being the muscles in this American gambling place. So life takes some funny turns, you know.
So there were a few decently nice guards.
Oh yeah, they were just average. But myself, I found the young ones to be bad. The young ones that haven't seen much, and perhaps because the first time I saw one with a head on a stick of a Filipino, that he had cut the head off, and he was walking around like it was a prize. Of course, by that time I'd been sick. It didn't make me sick, because I was already as sick as I could be. But he was walking around like it was a great thing. He had a head on a stick, you know. But I never had the urge to cut anybody's head off, so I didn't know about that, you know.
What about? I remember you telling me one time that they would sneak up behind you with a big bamboo stick and hit you in the back of the leg.
Yeah, they'd do that just for honoring. Maybe I wasn't working fast enough or something. So I got hit a few times. But the worst thing I got was I had a bad eye. The guy had people lined up, and he was a karate man. And he was coming around, and he was hitting everybody right behind your head. I'll show you if you want me to. But he had a hard hand, and he goes, boom. So he hit the guy next to me, and the guy just didn't put his hand, he fell right in the sand. So I turned around to see what the hell was happening, and he got me in the eye. And he said he was sorry. But that time, I went to the Japanese doctor. No Scotia, it was no good. And my eye's been screwed up ever since. I had it operated on when I came home, but it's not good. You know, maybe it's 20/60 or something.
Was the Japanese doctor nice, or?
Oh, they were better. They were I don't know how to say it, a class above some of the guards that we were dealing with. And also we found out later that some of the guards were rejects from the Army. That was their punishment. And so they were already kind of goofy. They weren't normal, I would say.
No, they had something to prove.
Yeah, they had something to prove by picking on somebody.
Any other stories you remember or talk about being in prison camp that you can think of?
Well, I told you my toilet paper story.
Yeah.
Did I tell you the story about going to I didn't smoke, so I used all my cigarettes for trading. And they had a hospital, and then in the hospital they had another hospital, and then inside that hospital they had a little ward for zero ward, they call it, for patients that were going to die. They couldn't do anything. They were laying on a mat. They couldn't do anything for them. So they give them a piece of liver, a little piece of liver, which is, you go blind if you don't have certain vitamins. Some guys went blind. So I bribed my way into the hospital, and I'd go and give a guy a cigarette or two, and I'd eat his liver. That doesn't sound right, does it? I'd eat the little piece of liver that they give him. So I got in the habit of doing that. So I went there, and here was this guy. He was from, I found out later because we became friends, but he was from Arkansas or someplace. And he had this real nice boots laying right by him. Of course, it was stinking and everything, but he had these real good boots, and my boots were just barely hanging on. So when I went there and got a piece of liver from him and give him a cigarette, I didn't want to. So I looked and I thought, shit, he's dead. So I put my boots there and took his boots. So 4 or 5 months later, in the main camp, I'm walking along, and there I see him trudging along. I look, he got all my old. So I said, hey, how you doing? I said, weren't you in Zero Ward? He says, yeah. And I said, how the hell did you get out of there? I said, last time I saw you, I thought you were dead. And he said, oh, he said, a few of us got out. And so I said, I got a lot of salt and some rice. You want some rice and salt? And he said, yeah. So I salted him some rice. So we become friends. So a couple of months later, he said, how did we become friends anyhow? And I said, well, I saw you were starving. I gave you some salt, some rice. But I said, if we're going to continue being friends, you got to stop calling me a sumbitch. You've got to quit calling. And he said, I never called you a sumbitch. I never did that. And I said, you do it every day. And I said, every day. And he said, no, I don't. And I said, all right. You see my boots? And he says, yeah, I had a pair like that when I was dying in Zero Ward, and some bitch took them. And I said, these are your boots. And he said, you son of a bitch. So anyhow, I rustled around and got him another pair of boots. And the guy said, so when he told some guy that story, and the guy said, I was on the death march with Thomas, and he said, a guy was laying there, looked like he was dead, and Thomas took his hat. It was an Australian hat. You know, they cost about $55 because I priced them since I got out. But it was an Australian hat, just a beautiful hat with a side clip. So I thought, oh, this guy's a goner. I took his hat and left my hat there. And so a couple of days later, I fell down. I was kind of sleeping when I had a little break, and I woke up and I said, some bitch stole my hat. And the guy said, well, how'd you get it in the first place? Well, that's different. That guy was dead. And he said, well, you look dead. He said, you look dead right now. Real good friend, you know.
Well, I remember also you told me one time about that the guards would make all the prisoners stick their hands
No,
in
that
a
was
bucket
just
of urine.
that was just me.
Just you?
Just me, because he go, "Ah, rah, 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 rah." So I told him one day, I said, you know, he understand a little bit of English. I said, you sound like a movie actor. He goes, oh, yeah, Donald Duck. You sound like him. He's a famous movie actor. Unfortunately, 2 weeks later, he went to the town, and they had a cartoon there that they showed these Japanese guards, and it was Donald Duck. And he came back, and he chased me around and made me put my hand on this bucket of pee-pee and poop. There was a little poop in there. Some guys would poop in it. But the Japanese were super clean. They had these barrels. They didn't want us to even pee on the ground. They wanted us to pee in this barrel. So he made me put my hand in there. I never got over it. So finally he got a great big rock, and he threw a rock, and he hit me right there. And it doesn't look like anything, but my ankle swelled up, and I couldn't walk. So they carried me back to camp in a stretcher, and I got 2 days off working in the mine, you know, for that thing there. But I never give any Japanese guards any nicknames unless they were complimentary. You know, like they were nice guys. No more fooling around with funny names like that. It didn't pay. And I've washed my hands thousands of times, but I still feel, yeah.
What were the final few months or weeks of prison camp like when you knew you were when did you find out you were gonna be released?
Oh, the day after they dropped the last bomb, the 15th, they dropped the bomb the 14th of August, and the 15th they came and said they're changing the camp commanders. They didn't leave the same commander there because the guys, one bunch of guys hung their commander, their Japanese commander, which was a stupid thing to do. You know, they still were prisoners. But all the real bad Japanese guards that were brutal disappeared overnight. Only the ones that weren't real bad stayed. And my man, you know, that did this, he stayed. And I challenged him to a fist fight. Tried to get him to fight me after a couple of weeks, you know, but he just hung his head, but he wouldn't leave because we had all the food. And sometimes we'd give him all the food and stuff. And I ended up giving him a lot of food for his family. But we were, a couple of guys ate too much and died. They dropped a little sheet of paper, like a sheet of paper, telling you, don't eat this, don't eat so much here, and don't drink your sake. because some of it's bad. You know, they're alcohol. Because the guys went out and traded food for alcohol. And some of it was terrible stuff. And I think that we had two Americans that died from being starved and then just eating all the time. You know, they kill themselves by eating too much.
Because they just couldn't help it after they had.
No,
so long?
I guess, yeah, they couldn't help it. But naturally, we were happy, and we went through in September, the middle of September. They come with a train and nurses, the first civilization we'd seen. They fixed the railroad tracks, and we went through Hiroshima. Of course, nobody actually knew what an atomic bomb was. And Hiroshima looked like they had thousands of planes bomb it. And it was one bomb. And then afterwards, when we got to the hospital, they tested us all to see if well, we were only there maybe 2 days. And we were right on the train. You know, we had nice bunks and all good food and everything. And some of the guys weren't mad at the Japanese because we threw a lot of food out the window to the starving Japanese. So whoever did that, some of us that did that, we weren't that mad at the Japanese, although I was mad at them for a couple of years. I couldn't help it.
What did so you were actually in Japan when the bombs were dropped?
Oh yeah, I was in Mitsubishi. We could see the planes weeks before we could see the planes flying over, and we were praying that they didn't drop bombs. Because the Japanese the guards talking, I said, when they drop bombs, boy, that was the end of that village, or the end of that factory. They were talking, and the guy that could understand Japanese would come and report all that. And we had to be real careful that they didn't find out that he was a stick, or a spy, I guess you call them. We call them sticks.
What was do you remember when you really for sure found out that it was just one bomb that blew up the whole city?
Oh hell, I never found out until I got to Manila, and they talked about it and said, "Oh, one bomb, bullshit. One bomb couldn't do that." We were used to bombing. Like I told you, thousands of planes, it was only 57, but a couple of bombs lit right by where my tank was. And they were little bombs. They were anti-personnel bombs. But when we come back through the town, we could see some of the ships had sunk and they were sticking up. And Japan was wrecked. People can't understand. Just like Iraq was wrecked. You know, like we wreck it, then we send people over there to fix it. Oh, God.
Do you guys, as prisoners, do you remember being worried that the Japanese guards weren't going to follow orders and weren't going to set you free? Were you afraid?
Well, there was rumors went around. Yeah, you didn't know what was going to happen. I know in one little place we were in a tunnel. They had a tunnel we'd go in. Just a little tunnel we'd go in, and after the war they found out that on Palau, and one guy was in there that I knew, 125 guys, they burnt them in a tunnel. And some of them just broke right out of the tunnel and ran and jumped in the ocean. About 5 of them, and the United States Navy picked them up. You know, they tore out of the tunnel and ran, and the Japanese shot a bunch of them, but most of them they burnt in the tunnel. They put gasoline in both ends of the tunnel. But war is hell. War is, it's just hell. That's all. It sounds bad when they kill us, but when he kill them, you know, 200,000 with one bomb, That's different. They're the enemy. And of course it isn't different, but
How was it when you were actually being released from the prison? Did Americans come to?
oh, everybody was super nice, kissing our ass and everything. It was nice. Anything you did, it was something. When we got to Manila, after I got out of the hospital, well, I wouldn't stay in the hospital. I didn't stay in the hospital. One night when I was out of the hospital, we had a car and we came up and the guy was delivering beer to one of the canteens, and I got out of the car and I climbed up on top, going to throw down some beer, and there was a Marine sitting there, a corporal with a rifle, and I had this thing on that showed I was like, I said, okay, I didn't know you were there, I'm sorry. I said, I was a prisoner, just released, and I'm kind of goofy. And he said, okay. He said, you can take one case. And I said, no, it's all right. I climbed down, and the guy that was driving the car said, goddamn, get us some beer. I said, you go on up and get it. And he said, well, I will. And I said, there's a Marine up there with a rifle, a young kid, trigger happy. He doesn't like big guys in it because the guy was a great big guy. He said, oh, shit, let's get out of here. Well, we zoomed out. They had guards on their all their boots, and anything valuable, the Army had to have a guard on it because the Filipinos would take it or the Americans would steal it. It was a no-go situation. You can't understand it. You just can't understand it.
Do you remember what happened in the Philippines after the war was over? How the Filipino people reacted to the Japanese leaving?
They were mighty happy. Mighty happy.
Were you in the Philippines when
No,
they left?
No, I never went back to the Philippines. A lot of guys went back different times. The guy with the organ, the guy that I stole the boots from, he married a Filipino. They were married for 30 years. She was a real nice lady. But no, I figured that Filipinos had one shot at me. I wasn't going to give them another shot.
What was it like when you were coming back, hearing all the news that you had missed while you were in prison camp? Was it kind of like a culture shock hearing?
Yeah, I soaked everything up, and my family was devastated. I was working at Moffett Field at a clerk's job, and the lady that was the boss there took a liking to me, and so she'd let me go home early, and she'd have me take her car to the garage, and I'd wait for her car to be serviced. So I took her car downtown in San Jose, and I went into the pool hall to play a game of pool while they were fixing her car. And there was a sergeant there, a recruiting sergeant, come over and said, hey, aren't you A.B. Thomas? And I said, yeah, how are you? I said, what are you doing in the Air Force? He was a sergeant in the Army. And he says, boy, the Air Force is a new career. He gave me a bunch of paperwork, and a couple months later I joined the Air Force. But that was a crazy thing to do because I had a chicken ranch in Mountain View. My mother and father lived in part of it, my sisters, and I lived in the other part. And I joined the service and went to recruiting in Minneapolis, near my hometown. I figured I'd get to see my hometown again, visit Mabel's mother, which happened. So I spent almost 15 years in the Air Force. Completely different than the Army, completely different. The first thing that happened that made me realize it was different, talking about fists and everything, I got in a boxcar. I got in a bus, and the guy said, I had all my stuff on there, and he says, you're in charge of this bus. And I said, oh yeah. I said, well, all these guys are going to be Air Force. And he said, you're going to be Air Force too. Aren't you going to re-up? And I said, well, yeah. Went to Hamilton Field. And after we re-upped. They gave me Master Sergeant stripe, one more stripe than this. So while I was right there in Sacramento, where they give me all that stuff, I got in a fight with two young privates. The guy, I don't know what we were fighting about, a nothing issue. And the guy said, if you didn't have all those stripes on, I'd kick your ass. And I said, you what? He's a young punk, 19 years old or something, just coming into the Air Force. So boy, I whipped off my coat and I give him a punch in the stomach. He vomited. Plunk. And before the other guy could get away, I gave him a punch in the jaw. So here's these two guys laying there, and they grabbed me. And a lieutenant comes and says, you can't fight like that. He says, and I said, well, I don't know, it looks like I did a pretty good job. And he said, oh. And next thing I knew, the guy said, how long have you had that stripe? And I said, a week. And he said, you get busted for something like that? And I said, the guy insulted me. And he says, Sergeant, he says, you did a good job. They're probably punks. But he says, this is the Air Force. You can't fight with somebody, especially somebody lower ranked than you. You can't fight with somebody higher. He says, so there's none of that Army shit fighting. And so I had one more fight in the Air Force because I give a guy an old hat just for a joke, but I didn't realize he was drinking. I went in the supply where they were issuing out uniforms, and I got an old beat-up hat. We saved those good hats for some of these guys that are just coming in, just making a joke. I turned around, he almost broke my jaw. And so they separated us, I never got to hit a lick. They separated us, and so when we got before the officer had papers there. All I had to do was sign it, and that guy get kicked out of he was a staff sergeant, one rank lower than me.
Did he get kicked out?
No, I wouldn't sign the papers. I told the officer, I said, well, I was teasing him, but I didn't. And then the guy said, I'm sorry. But when we got on me, I could smell the booze on him. He had just come in from all night drunk, and he was still kind of drunk. So he didn't think it was funny.
When you when you were leaving or when you were coming back home, did all your family and Mabel and stuff, did they think you were dead? Was it a big shock when you came back and they heard you?
Well, they thought I was dead because one of my friends met them at the ship when they landed at San Francisco. They met the ship there, and the guy told them, I'm sorry, but Thomas, I'm sorry, I'm terrible sorry he died. But it was another Thomas, AB or KC. It was KC Thomas that died. So he thought I died. And luckily, an hour before that, Mabel had got a letter that I wrote that they let us write so many letters. The airways was full. It wasn't like it was nowadays where you pick up a phone. You couldn't do that. You couldn't even go to right after the war, you couldn't go and send a telegram. Everything was clogged up. And luckily, she had got the letter the same day, the message. I didn't actually talk to her voice. I sent a telegram that I'm home, that I'm well, and I'll be home in a couple of weeks. And I was home in a week. I came home a week later.
So did the Japanese were you able to ever send letters when you were?
The little cards, and I lied on the cards, said I was a middleweight. So that's the only time I sneaked something by the Japanese, because they didn't actually know I'm back to my middleweight form, which is 155 pounds. Never weighed 155 pounds in my life. I always weighed 140, 135.
Did you have trouble adjusting to civil? Well, I guess how long were you a civilian when you came back before you joined the Air Force?
I was a civilian a year before I joined the Air Force. A guy that spent that much time in the Army under those circumstances, then joined the Air Force, they should have sent me to a psychiatrist right away and said, we don't want this guy, anybody that goofy. But see, the Air Force was new. It was building up. It wasn't the United States Air Force. It was the U.S. Air Force. It's separated from the Army. And a psychiatrist would say, we don't want some old reject from the Army to be a sergeant.
Did you have anything to do? Did you do anything in the Air Force in the Korean War?
Anything what?
Did you have to do with the Korean War much when you were in the Air Force?
No, I was on recruiting duty. The day the Korean War started, I was on recruiting duty, and I was in Palo Alto talking to some high school students, and they're raising hell now about the recruiters coming to the school. In the paper they were reading about the recruiters coming to the schools. But I was a recruiter, and I would just talk to the top-notch guys trying to get them in the Air Force. And I did good. There was a lot of nice young men out there, and I told them I felt terrible about that. Every one of them, I told their parents that wars were 35, 40 years apart. Just because I believed it. So your kid, if he gets in the Air Force, will have a nice career and he'll have a nice pension before the next war starts. I believed that. I was peddling some shit that I believed myself. And I went to Stanford University, where my headquarters was, and I was what they call a mouthy sergeant. I don't like to say that, but I was mouthy. I didn't have to take anything, and I didn't. So I went there, and I went in the office. Doctor, I didn't even know the guy. I was a colonel. And I said, here's all my papers. You got to assign me something else. I'm through recruiting. Well, the Army, the Air Force spent this money training you. He gave me the old. And I said, wait a minute, Colonel. I said, wait a minute. I said, a guy like me I said, you don't even know my career, but I spent all the war in a prison camp. I'm not going to recruit somebody that might get shot down and get in a prison camp. I can't do it anymore. And he said, well, sit down here. And he says, everything's going to change. Everything's changing. You're right. He said, I'm not going to be on recruiting either. He was giving me the old colonel bullshit, you know. So I got sent to Minneapolis, and I can't remember where he got sent to. But I had one incident happen in the service. The Army, the government did a lot of poopy things, and one thing they did that was bad. You got a guy that's a captain or a major. He's getting real good money, and when the war was over, they downgraded everybody. So they kicked a lot of guys out that were career men, had 7 or 8 years in the service, and they said they could be sergeants. They could come in the Air Force as a sergeant. So one guy, Bailey, his name was, he was a staff sergeant, and he was on my crew in Minneapolis. And we got to talking one time, and I said, how long you been in the service? And he said, well, I've been in 10 years. And somebody said, he was an officer. And I said, what are you talking about? And he says, well, I was an officer during World War II. And I said, no kidding. I said, well, I was in prison camp during World War II. So we got to talking. So I was a sergeant, and he was under my command. So I treated him real nice. And he invited me to his house for dinner and everything. So as the years roll on, 5 years later, I get assigned to Oxnard, and they brought in, that's when the guy said I was a Napoleonic, brought into Oxnard, and so they had a little meeting with all the sergeants and the officers there, and he was a colonel. He's sitting there and he says, hey, Thomas. He got up and he gave me a hug, you know, and he says, this meeting's over, we'll have a meeting tomorrow. He says, him and I are old friends. So after he and I went to dinner, some of the guys said, oh boy, what a brown noser. He's already friends with the colonel.
How was it? How was it coming back to your home life, to coming back to Mabel and
Oh,
starting a
everybody.
family?
Oh, everybody treated me like I was something special. And I wrote a story. That's another story somebody said I should send in to Reader Digest about being special. Maybe I'll send. You don't remember my story about being special?
I don't think so.
About a lady that was 10 years older than me, and she was dying, and I went to visit her, and she said, "Were we ever lovers?" I go, "No." I said, "I'm married," and she says, "Yeah, but I just wondered if we were ever lovers." She said, "I just have a feeling you'd be special as a lover. I just know you would." So I come out of there feeling 6 foot tall. So then I brought the ugliest guy in my outfit to see her, and he was alone with her, and he came out of there feeling like, and he says, "Boy, she's special, isn't she?" So everybody I brought there, they come out of there smiling like they were special. Anyhow, I wrote a story, and my friend said my writing class said I should send it to Reader Digest, but it got no cuss words, or like I wrote a story that my class thought was funny about Brian, my son Brian. I had so many kids, I felt like killing one. I felt like killing my kid because he had a cold, and the doctor said we should treat him nice when he was 7 years old, and he said he wanted to eat a dog turd. And I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" And so one of the kids went out and got a dog turd and brought it in, and Mabel fried it up about as big as my finger and cut off a little piece. Said, "Dad's got to eat a piece first." Yeah, 7 years old, you know. So I choked down that little piece of dog turd, and then he said, "I'm not going to eat it." He said, "Dad ate the piece I wanted." So I sent it to school, and the woman said, "If there was some way you could clean it up, you could send it to Reader Digest." And I said, the only thing that kept me from killing him is his big brothers were there. Pat and Mike, his big brothers, and my wife kept me from killing him right there. I said, that's the closest call I had to killing any of my kids. Said, well, the reason I wanted to kill him is I come home and said, Brian won a show and tell today. And I said, oh, that's good. I was still mad at him, you know. And he said, well, aren't you going to ask what a show and tell was about? One of the kids said, and yeah, what was your? He said, the teacher called Mabel and said, does your husband eat dog turds? That was his show and tell. That's when I wanted to kill him. If you ever see him, ask him.
Well, so when you were in civilian places, just in jobs and at home and stuff like that, did you have trouble?
I had trouble.
Toning down your
temper?
But
A couple of times they changed me to something else. I was a mailman for 2 weeks, and mailmen, you know, are special. And they had a guy come around, and my guy that was teaching me putting mail in the apartment house, and my cousin lived there. And I said to the guy, let's go in there and have my cousin make us some coffee. And he said, oh, you can't go in people's house when you're delivering mail. I said, what are you talking about? It's my cousin. I said, well, wait out here then. So I said, wait in the car. Wait in the truck. We had a little truck that was dangerous too. So I went in. Half an hour later I came out, and the guy said, there's a checker there, a checker. And I said, what's a checker? And he said, somebody checking to see if we're working. And I said, where is he? And he said, that Chevrolet over there, checker. I went, and he grabbed my hand and said, don't do that, we'll both get fired. But they took it as a joke. I thought it was funnier than heck. When I got there, the guy said, he come down to where we were all having coffee. You know, I was a nothing. I was just a new he come down and he says, who's Thomas? Who's Arthur Thomas? And I said, I am. And he's and the guy that was training me, he goes, oh, Oh, he said, I thought that was 14 years down the drain. In the first place, he got me for not delivering mail for a half an hour in there drinking coffee with my cousin. And then I come out and I give them the finger. So they give me a different route.
So you were in the Air Force for 15 years. What was it like finishing up your career, and
Oh,
how did you end up?
They come around and said that they were going to give some extra thing in your bonus in your retirement for old sergeants. And I said, God darn, I wish I was old. And the guy said, you are old. You're an old sergeant. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you can sign up and you can get 3.5% more on your pension check. My pension is from the Air Force is $2,391, tax free. That's a hell of a pension. So I said, are you kidding? I said, but I'm not that old. He said, you're old. You're old for the service. So 17 years later, when I was working civil service, the guy come around and he said, they got this new thing that if you retire, the civil service gives you 4.5% on your pension. I said, God, I wish I could get on it. I'm getting tired of the commute. I was commuting from San Jose to San Francisco. It was a hell of a commute. Get up 5 o'clock in the morning. And the guy said, they're looking for old people like you to retire. And I said, well, I'll only be 60. And he said, that's old. That is old. So I retired twice for being too old.
You were 60 when you retired from the Air Force?
From civil service.
Oh. How old were you when you retired from
I was
the Air Force?
43 or something like that.
And that was
But-
old?
But that was old. No, I'm serious. I got, they would entice you with a more on your retirement, and then they hoped you didn't live too long. You know.
Do you remember any more good stories about any of your kids, or my dad especially? Any more turdy?
I don't know if there are any I could repeat.
It's just us here.
Yeah, I know, but people are going to turn that thing off. I'll tell you a story.
Maybe.
Or when we end, I'll tell you a story, but you can't put it on tape.
Any?
Because I can't lick your dad anymore. In fact, I couldn't lick him when he was 15.
Is there any stories you can tell in front of the camera? Do you remember?
No. Any more Army stories? No.
Anything you remember? Anything you can back up? Doesn't have to go in order. Anything you remember about? Any other stories you remember about being in the Army or prison camp or anything like that?
Well, I had a special deal going in that one time we had a party at the NCO club and this guy got real drunk. He was a big guy. King, his name was. So he was a sergeant. So I brought him back to his house and I had some guys help me because he was just, drove him back to his house, knocked on the door, and his wife, these two, we helped put him to bed. So his wife thought I was something special. So when the years rolled on, he got his commission back and he was in the assignments division in Washington. So about 4 times, every time I got an assignment that I didn't like they said I had special training, and they sent me to Bangor, Maine, a terrible place. I mean, it's as far away as you can get from California. So I went right to Washington and went in his office, and he got me another spot at Hamilton Field. So 3 or 4 times I went to him whenever I got poopy assignments. Like I put in for a special assignment to be a warrant officer. I wanted guys to salute me. And after a year, they called me up and said, "You're a warrant officer, and you gotta go to headquarters." I said, "Oh, where's that?" It was in Brooksfield, Texas. I don't know if you've ever been in Texas, but it's way out in the middle of nowhere. It's a terrible base. So I go there, and I told the guy, "Well, what am I here for?" And he says, "This is your headquarters. You're going to have training for a while. You got to get your family out here." I go, "Oh, I just bought a house, you know."
In San Jose?
So I said, "Well, how do I get out of this?" And he says, "What do you mean get out of it? It costs the Army thousands of dollars to train you, thousands of dollars to bring you here." And that was a year ago. He said, "Now you're going to tell them you don't want it?" I said, "I don't want it. I don't want to live in Texas. I want to live right where I'm at." And so I went back to Washington, and they canceled everything and made me back as a sergeant. But that was one of my good deals. And being a prisoner, they leaned over backward. Like I went to, I had a motel when I went. They sent me to Scott Air Force Base, which is my headquarters. And we were in a motel with Pat, and I had about 5 kids then. We were in a motel, and I come out of my meeting, and I go to the motel. I went to the house. They had us in the house, and the guy said they moved to the motel down the street. I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, they kicked you out of this house." So I immediately go, and the guy was a lifelong friend. Mr. Kelly was a housing officer. And I went in, I got on the phone, "I got to speak to Mr. Kelly." And I wanted, and they said, "Well, he'll have an opening." I said, "I got to speak to him right now. I don't give a shit what he's doing. I want to talk to him." So when I come in there, he said, "You're Sergeant Thomas?" And he said, "I thought you were 7 foot tall." He says, what's the matter with you?" So I told him I had a big family. I was with a happy family in Hamilton Air Force Base. And they sent me to Scott, to headquarters here, to take some training. And I said, I moved into a hotel, and they said they were going to give me quarters, real nice quarters, but they're not painted. I don't care if they're painted or not. I'm spending $110 a day for a motel. I said, no way. I want my family moved to the quarters. And he says, God, you must think you're a general or something. I said, no, I'm a sergeant. And I pointed to my other stripes. And he said, okay. Where are they at? I told them, and they sent trucks out, and they moved my family right into a big house. So I joined the bowling team, and when I went to bowl the first week, who was my captain but Warrant Officer Kelly? He said, hey, there's the mouth. He said, there's the mouth, Thomas the Mouth. And of course we become friends, but and I had a good job. I was working for the security, so I could cover up some little things, and I did. I cheated. I'll admit that. I helped with a guy, but the one time we covered a guy up, and he was, for 2 days we got a guy to sign his name that he was on leave, and he went off a bank up there at Paso Robles and killed himself, and he was in a ditch for 2 days in his car, and we were signing him up. We were signing that he reported for duty. That was kind of touchy. I told the guy, I said, I've been doing this for a year. You said it would be 6 months. I don't want to do it anymore. And he says, don't worry. He says, you're off the hook. We're taking you out. He says, signing up for some poor bastard that's dead. That was kind of sticky. But people do things. I know you've never done anything hanky-panky, but I do anything now, but I don't sign my name. I don't, like when is it all right to say that I loaned your dad $100,000? You knew that, didn't you?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
And when I went to there, the lady was so serious. I brought her a box of chocolates. I said, whose signature is that? She says, well, that's yours, isn't it, Mr. Thomas? I said, I don't write my name like that. Whose is that? And Pat was there. And Pat said, he's just kidding. And she said, oh. I jerked her chain, you know.
What about Panama? When were you scheduled? When were you stationed in Panama?
A beautiful assignment, yeah. Wasn't your dad born in Panama?
Mm-hmm. But I don't know anything about what you were doing there, how long you were there.
I was there and as an inspector, and everybody knew what my IG, they call it the IG team, Inspector General's team. And when I came back one time on a free trip to visit, the guys were kind of cool, and I said, what the hell's the matter with everybody? And the guy said, well, are you here on duty or are you here just to visit? And I said, damn it, I'm on a visit. I'm not going to report anything. They thought I was there to report shortfalls, you know, and little hanky-pankies. Like the one guy come and said, I thought you were looking at typewriters, because I came and I looked, and there they were sending 5 typewriters to Guatemala. They had a racket going where the typewriter man said the typewriters were no good, so they made them obsolete. So you could buy one for every member of the family. So the guy bought 5 typewriters. His wife and him and his 3 kids each bought a typewriter for $22 or something. And there he was sending them for a big profit to Guatemala.
What were you originally doing in Panama? What were you in? You were just inspecting the officers?
I was. Yeah, and I did one thing. I told Chris about it. He said, boy, that's really an asshole. There was a guy that was an inspector come to inspect us. And he was real straight. And he was the same rank as I was. He was the senior master sergeant. So all of the senior master sergeants were new. It was a new rank. So he really thought he was something. So I told the guy, I said, ring the fire bell in about 15 minutes. So he's got his briefcase there. I shouldn't even tell this because he says what a prick I was. So the guy rang the fire bell and he goes, hey, what's that? I reached in and got a whole handful of his papers, put them in my briefcase. So the next day they flew out. So when they flew out, I went and brought it to my warrant officer, and he wasn't too happy with them either. They're inspecting us. We're inspectors. They're inspecting us to see how we do business. And I said, the guy left his papers here. And he said, no. Boy, he got on the phone and he called the Air Force and had the plane turn around and come back. And the guy said, I don't understand that. I don't understand that. And I said, well, let's you and I go have coffee. So we go have coffee, and I said, you can't give off an arrogant thing like you're something special when you're an inspector. And he said, well, I don't do that. And I said, yes, you do. I said, you know I'm an inspector. I was an inspector years before you were. You're new on the job. So I said, when they rang the fire bell, I reached over and I took some of your papers. And he said, oh. And so I said, so he had a warrant officer. Dean was the guy's name. I still remember a warrant officer that was his boss. So I went and told his boss, I said, because I was at headquarters. So I went and told his boss, I said, he's not at fault. I said, I stole the papers out of his bag just to bring you guys down a peg. And I said, of course, I'll deny it. And I know you're not taping this, because we used to put tapes under a table. And when the women came to talk. One day they were talking about a guy with a short, what a terrible lover he was. And I told the guy said, "Oh my God, Thomas, this tape is worth hundreds of dollars." And I said, "Yeah, it is." And I took it, I cut it up. I said, "We could all go to jail." We had a thing you could stick under a table and it would record everything you said. And the women would sit at the same table. And we made sure that they got there on that table. So as soon as they sat down, the guy pressed the button. They're recording everything. But the warrant officer, he laughed. He thought that was the funniest thing. And I said, "Well, it costs the Air Force money to turn a big plane around and come down and land again." I said, "You guys going to stay the night?" And he said, "No, we got to go back."
So, but did the guy get in trouble for that?
No, but he was a big guy, but I know he would like to kick my ass. But he was, it's just like being a policeman or something. You can't give off an air of superiority or that you're God and they're down here. You can't do that. They had special, I know my son Brian said I missed that part of the training, but I didn't. I did sensitive training, they called it. I went to a sensitive training mission, and there was a woman there. There was a big wheel, and they had crime of the day on the board every time. What you'd say that was good. They'd put it on the board every day, then you'd see it the next day. It was on the board, and she said, or I said to her, "Well, you've been to this sensitive class now." I said, how about sitting across from me for breakfast like my wife has to do every morning?" And she says, "Well, I've had this training, but I don't think it was that good." So, so they put that on the board. The next day comes, "Our training isn't that good to sit across from Mr. T." and at that sensitive training we were at a hotel downtown in San Francisco, and when you go into the bathroom, they had a mirror up there where the men stand in the urinal, and they said, "If you want to write, here's a piece of chalk, write something on this mirror here." And so we had a new boss, Clyde, Mr. Clyde his name was, and everybody, the old boss was real good, so when the new boss comes in, the old boss is good, they kind of cool him a little bit. So we're having this dinner, 16 or 18 people. So when I went in there, he drank a beer or two, so I went in there and I wrote on there, "Mr. Ross," I said, "what are you looking up here for? The joke's in your hand." I wrote that right there, and I told everybody, I said, "Don't go in the bathroom." I told the men, when you go in the bathroom, don't erase what I wrote there. So pretty soon he got up to go to the bathroom. He came, and he was smart. He came down, he sat down, and had a little sip of his wine or whatever he was drinking. And he looked, he's eliminating the people. And he came to me, and when he came to me,
It was you.
so afterward, when we got back to the office, he said, "I want to see Mr. Thomas in my office." And I come in here, and he said, "It was you, wasn't it?" And I said, "What do you mean it was me?" And he said, "That was you, wasn't it?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I knew it."
But he wasn't mad.
Huh?
He wasn't.
Oh, no. Because a couple of weeks later, he told some of the guys, he said, "I never felt accepted in the office as a supervisor. I never felt accepted until we went to that dinner and Mr. Thomas wrote something nasty on the bulletin."